Good morning, everyone. My name is Saurabh Buweja. I'm the CEO and Chief Brand Strategist at Brands of Desire. We are a management consulting firm focused on building brands. I'd like to welcome my members here at the ETBrandEquity.com roundtable discussion. It's the first one of the day, and it's a fantastic set of members who've got a very, very rich and diverse experience. So welcome to all of you. Right? The discussion of our topic is earned, owned, paid, and shared media, and how brands are handling the 4 pillars of communication. But before I begin, I'd like to actually, do a very, very short introduction for all of you listeners and people who are watching this live webcast. To my right, I have Sudeep Bhalla. He's the Senior Vice President, Corporate Communication and Sustainability, Vodafone Idea. Further to his left is Ofira Bhatia, and she's the Director, Corporate and Government Affairs at Mondelez India. And to her left is Arushi G. Phillips, and she's the Senior Manager, Corporate Communications, FCB India. Yes. And to her left is Sonia Huria. She's the Head, Corporate Marketing, Communications and Sustainability at Viacom 18 Media. And to my left is Anandita Sarkar. She's the Director, Corporate Communications, Dentsu Aegis Network India. And further to her left is Abhishek Roy. He's the Chief Manager, PR at Magic Bricks. And finally, we've got Prateek Chatterjee to his left. He's the Senior Vice President, Corporate Communications and Marketing, NIIT. So welcome to all of you. And probably you could say a hi to everyone, and we begin. Great, wonderful. Yeah. So I think the first question that I'd like to ask you, in this particular discussion, is related to what you do about some of these areas of topics or discussions. The 4 quadrants of media, as we call it. The earned, owned, paid, and shared in your respective organizations. But for the benefit of the listeners out here, I'd like to maybe just do a basic description, or maybe just open up the vocabulary so that we understand it exactly the same way. The way I learned these 4, because there used to be 2 only, but somebody told me that, treat it like a currency. And how do you treat it like a currency? So you can call it peso, which is the Mexican currency, right? And so the peso actually expands as paid, earned, shared, and owned in no particular order. So it depends on how you want to use it and how you want to divide your budgets across it. And the way I'd like to describe it is, paid is something when you're going to be buying out stuff like, especially if it's online, then Google AdWords, other types of search or display advertising. Earned is when your customer becomes the channel. And big influencers here are the word of mouth. So reviews, ratings, press releases, any buzz or viral content could be actually qualified or classified as earned. Shared, in this case, some people call it social also, but let's call it shared for the sake of this particular discussion. Shared media would essentially be all about your social media, the creating engagement part of it, the community building is where the shared media comes in. And finally, we've got the owned media. This is what you own. This is your website, your content. You can control the messaging, your Facebook pages, Medium, blogs, the kind of content that you would want to control, and where you end up becoming the media yourself, right? So I think that that is a basic introduction to the topic, definitions, and the people out here. Let's begin the discussion. So my question to start with Sudeep, and I think this is the same question to everyone, and it will be a contextual discussion in that sense. Sudeep, so you've been at Vodafone Idea, and my question to you is, how are you handling these 4 pillars of communication with respect to your organization, your firm, and what are the kind of challenges you're looking to solve while you're doing that?
Thanks, Saurabh. Coming from an organization which is in the telecommunications business, which essentially is sort of the backbone for all the social and digital engagements that you see, I think the onus on us is twofold. One is to enable this whole ecosystem, as it were. And the second, more pertinent, is for our own brands and for our own organization. We are fortunate to have 2 of the most loved telecom brands in the country. And between those 2 brands, depending upon the customer profiles, depending on the geographies in which they are its respective leaders, there is a very strong element that goes into creating a communication purpose, objective, and then a strategy in which all these 4 pillars are used to effectively drive the same common communication objective and the message. The split that we have within the organization from a structuring perspective is very clear, that there is a brand and the marketing team which looks at the paid part of it, and from a corporate communications perspective, we looked at the earned part of it. Now, owned assets are far easier to leverage because it's your own baby. You are essentially creating the collateral, creating the content which you publish and post. But beyond that, the sharing goes from both aspects, whether it is the paid content. I mean, commercials that we produce, the films that we produce typically get lots of views across the country.
Sure.
And the second part is a lot of content that we create from a communications perspective, because when you're working in the earned media space, you're typically also aware of the fact that there are certain limitations and certain guidelines which people would have if these were branded communications. So how is it that you're able to create content which is relevant, meaningful, is essentially talking about your brand or your product and or service, but it's not effectively branded, so as to say, in a direct sense. There's also a cell that we have which monitors conversations about all the relevant topics of the day, not just for our industry and our business, but also what's happening in the world, entertainment, politics, sports, be it. And how is it that we can actually become part of those conversations? How is it that we can make meaningful contributions to that, such that it is not forcing anything, but it's just making us more relevant and more in line with what our consumers are, kind of expressing on the digital forums. Another thing I would like to share is we're actually looking at it slightly beyond just digital, because our business is such that it's both brick and mortar as well as digital. So while digital forms the crux and core of it, the physical attributes, the brick and mortar part of it also plays a huge role in it. So whether it's my retail stores, whether it's my distribution outlets, whether it is the promotional activities that would happen in malls or corporate offices, multiplexes, etc. All these make a sort of a healthy integrated mix that drives what we want to tell our customers about our products, about our services, about our brand and the organization in a holistic mix. Mm-hmm. I think that's what I would leave it at.
Great. Thanks, Sudeep. Ophira, over to you. Different industry, and I believe even the nature of your work may not exactly be linked to the industry, or is there a very strong correlation between the role that you play as the Director of Corporate and Government Affairs, and does that kind of impact the way you end up using the different forms of media? So over to you, Ophira. Yeah.
So let me start by the nature of the industry we are in, right? So I think we provide some of the most loved brands that this country knows. I mean, we've all grown up on brands like Cadbury Dairy Milk and Bonvita and Gems. So we have a very strong consumer connect that we need to continue to build. And for an industry like ours, therefore, I think this whole space of paid, earned, owned, and shared becomes increasingly important. And over the last 5 to 7 years, I think we've seen an increased traction. And we work very closely with marketing, similar to what Sudeep said.
Yeah.
There is one space which the marketing and the brand looks after, which is direct consumer engagement. And so we have programs that go on our Facebook pages, our Twitter handles, on YouTube, which is all storytelling directly linked to the consumer. Whereas my team, which is the corporate affairs team, looks more at the earned part of it and also overlaps with the shared part of it. Mm-hmm. So that's how we sort of come together. And I think the marriage between what marketing and brand does and what corporate affairs does is actually very well balanced. Mm-hmm. Because on the one hand, what they do online is a form of paid, because they're reaching out to the consumer, they're marketing our products, they're building brand love, consumer engagement, building influencer marketing online. At the same time, what we do, both from a corporate perspective as well as a brand perspective, is really track those conversations, build on those conversations, I think, do the storytelling sometimes behind it, because where does all of this come from? It's basically come from the trend of storytelling. Sure. And consumers increasingly want to hear stories that appeal to them, to that emotional connect. And if you look at the way our brands are now online, example was the Bonvita exam film that we did last year. It was a film that went on to YouTube, and garnered so many comments, likes, shares, because it hit a very sensitive area, which is the exams for parents, and children actually fighting back and saying, you know, I'm going to give up my guitar lessons because my parents want me to study. So that was the art of storytelling, which was amplified online, and it was amplified by the brand and marketing team, but we as corporate affairs and corporate communication had an equal role to play in actually driving that message through. So within Mondelez, I think it's comes together very beautifully. The art of storytelling, we look at it as one piece, largely driven by marketing and brand, and then of course led and driven also partly by the corporate affairs team. But what we do, corporate affairs, is the online reputation management. That is one space that is given entirely to the team that I sort of lead. And that looks into areas of concerns and issues that consumers may have, responding quickly, reaching out, and things like that. We, as Sudeep's team does, also track the entire universe. We track the trends. We see what people are talking about, how that's relevant to us. And that's how we engage, both at a global level and at a local level. Sure. So that's how we work.
So, you know, just as a follow-up question, Ofira, so you shared the Bonvita example and how successful the campaign was in the online space. And you also mentioned somewhat that you had an equal balance between what you were contributing or your team was contributing versus the marketing and brand team. My question is there really an equal balance? And who's usually the trigger for a concept? I mean, do you really sit down and brainstorm, or is it like something has been thought through and they just want your point of view? Because originally speaking, you know, storytelling was the prerogative of people who were supposed to focus on earned media. Yeah. And suddenly marketing and brand building per se, especially when it comes to consumer, has moved into that space of storytelling as a medium to actually sell, you know, and not just share about your organization. So is it really equally balanced? I mean, a very quick answer from you.
That's a very good question, actually. Yeah. Maybe not. I think it's largely still led by the brand and the marketing team at this point in time, because everything that they do online also has to relate to the brand story that they want to tell, which is a larger piece. Where we come in is we partner with them in telling that brand story. Yeah, and amplifying the message that they sort of put out.
Sure.
Yes.
You know, it differs from industry to industry. So in the case of an FMCG brand, it will be the marketing team that will be taking the lead versus, you know, a media company where communications plays the first role. Sure. You know, marketing is then supporting it with it. So it differs from an industry to industry.
That makes sense, yes. Getting the context
and somewhere I would like to say it differs from brand to brand as well. Since
brand,
being in the business of advertising, we do a lot of campaigns for various clients. So someone like a Scoop Whoop, you would never really get them to connect to a cause which is close to our hearts. But Scoop Whoop was a client, and we did a campaign with them called the Sabrimala, for the Sabrimala event. So what we did that since there was a ban on women attending the temple, so we had an innovative way to have women attend the temple by way of checking in at the temple. So that was our way of giving our support to Women Tribe and giving an idea to Scoop Whoop to go beyond what they usually do, which is mainly considered to be the paid form. So that's another example of a brand, how it's different for a brand.
And I think this confluence of coming together is beautifully done when there is a cause marketing effort. So when there's cause marketing initiatives that need to be undertaken, you need to create a movement of sorts. I think it really brings it together beautifully.
I was just going to mention the term causevertising because that's what's really catching up right now. So people and brands right now, they are very, very emotionally driven. And I don't know if how many of you would have seen the campaign Sindoor Khela for the Times of India. So that was done by us. So the entire story behind it was to change a 400-year-old tradition wherein women were not allowed to enter temples, play Sindoor Khela, be a part of that tradition. So we initiated something of that sort where we invited sisters, and the entire idea was to promote sisterhood. And the problem Times of India came to us was that, with that the Telegraph is #1 number one in Kolkata. How can we overpower them? So that's what we thought. And Sindoor Khela somewhere is very close to my CCO's heart. She's also from Kolkata. So somewhere she had faced certain things in the past, and this is what brought this campaign to life. And as soon as Times of India heard it, they were absolutely, they had, without any two thoughts, they just bought the idea. And in a matter of 2-3 weeks, we touched about 3 million views. So like,
So I'll be curious to know from your experience, Arushi. So how did such a campaign idea trigger? Number one. And number two, you know, at the end of the day, when we talk about campaigns, how do you decide if it's an advertising campaign or is it a PR campaign, or what label do you like to give, you know, when you're working on some of these things? Is it based on what I like to call it, or is it based on how the world likes to see it? Yeah.
actually, you can call it what you want to, but the thing is that right now, the way we have seen that brands are evolving and growing, they do understand that the consumers are very well informed these days. So they make very informed decisions. The times have changed when you used to make a 1 minute or a 30-second ad and you get people to buy your product. That's not the case right now. So somewhere, in order to connect to the people that you are reaching out to, you need to touch that chord in their heart, and basically you need to connect with them. So it's not a set formula wherein you make an ad or you make something which is paid media or you do something which is a PR stunt or something. It has to be a 360 thing in order to make it a success. Because if you talk about the example that I was mentioning, which is Sindoor Khela, it was more of a activation rather than a PR stunt or a advertisement that we made.
So we can call it an activation campaign.
Yeah, you can say that. You can say that.
Great.
So in the first event that happened, there were actually transgender women who could attend the event. So the sentiment there was what played with us.
Sure.
I mean, it played in our favor. And in about 3 months, Times of India took over Telegraph. So that's the business result that we gave the client. And this is how it came to life.
Rest is history. And so, Sonia, from your perspective, so you are actually part of a firm that actually owns media, right? So you're not talking about owned media here anymore. So for an organization which actually owns media, you could have two perspectives. One, how do you want your clients, your customers to look at you, in which of the quadrants? And secondly, you got another layer where you are also supposed to communicate and reach out to you know, audiences. So help us understand from your context, you know, how does this breakup happen? Is there really a breakup which is conscious?
See, you know, PISO has always existed in our formative years as well, when we were putting communication strategies. But earlier, they could actually all stand as an independent pillar. Today, with the convergence of media, it's almost become like all these 4 pillars are forming like a pyramid structure. You know, they're all kind of coming together, and we are all in a way codependent on each of these pillars that are there. I'll begin with what we do at Viacom 18. We have the privilege firstly of owning content. Right? And owning content goes a long way in building the brand identity of an organization. Right? And also, you know, having various touch points with the consumer. So in that pyramid, in the hierarchy of the pyramid, the base is actually the own media. And it plays a pivotal role, as communicators have maximum control on the content we put out ourselves there, in the form of newsrooms, in the form of blogs, in the form of social media content, like you rightly set out. But in parlance to Viacom 18's you know, philosophy of opening new worlds, we also want to look at content where we can bring about some social change. You know, so the content that we put out in the form of a movie called Toilet Ek Prem Katha, it relates back to the Swachh Bharat movement. Or if you look at a show that is running right now, the show name is Kesri. It's basically equality of rights for even a girl child to get out there in wrestling, in the world of wrestling. Thereafter, there's a show that we're doing again with the Government of India called Navrangi Re. It's focusing on fecal sludge management. Now, how many of us even know what fecal sludge management is? But that whole job of, you know, actually putting out content in an entertaining manner, first reaches to the consumer, connects with them, and then subtly you put out that message out there.
Okay.
And then you support it with the next most pivotal thing, which is paid media. Now, paid media amongst all of us as a fraternity is highly debatable, right? Do we want to support it? What do we want to do with it? But the reality is that if you work in an integrated marketing media way, paid media is our reality. And we do all depend on it. That is the fact of the matter. Moving on to shared media. Shared media is extremely pivotal again because, it brings in this whole credibility. Suddenly when you have influencers and the right influencers talking for your campaign or your show or the concept that you're putting out, that makes suddenly more sense. Then comes your earned media. Earned media is what we traditionally all grew up to, right? Like when we said we woke up the next morning, we open the newspaper and we have a piece of news that's related to us, because it shapes actual opinions out there, when the editor or a journalist writes something about you. The point that I'm really making is that it's about how all of them have come together and we are interdependent on each other, and none of them can today, at least as a marketer for us, exist in a solo form.
Sure. I think very interesting perspective that you raise, and I'm just going to maybe carry that discussion and pass it on to Anandita here. So it's easier for me to pass the baton here. So you mentioned that there is not so much of a quadrant, but more of a pyramid structure when it comes to these media
so the
forms.
Base being
right?
your
and
own content.
Probably the base is going to be stronger, and you've got something at the top which is more valuable.
Yeah.
Which
is
yes,
at the
yes.
outlets, yeah.
So the question is, who owns the pyramid? Is there anybody in the organization who could say that, hey, I'm going to decide how this is going to happen, or so who owns it? Who's responsible for integrating and putting together this pyramid-looking structure, if at all there's one? Yeah.
The person who signs the bills.
Is it so?
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
great. That's an easy one.
See, at the end of the day, we are all in a business which at the end of the day has to make money and pay salaries and also keep its integrity in line with what we want to do. At Denso Network, I think we are standing on a tripod. There is no paid media whatsoever.
Okay, so we move from quadrants to pyramids to tripods.
Tripod.
Okay. Different kinds of shapes, yeah.
Why I'll say, because we are a completely B2B conglomerate when it comes to an advertising agency network. And we are purely service-led. So, which is primarily, the service is primarily intellect-led, which is idea, which is strategy. So if you see any company which is purely service-led, they do not advertise. And Infosys does not advertise. KPMG does not advertise. Sanjay Leela Bhansali does not advertise himself. He advertises his brands and the films. So, yeah, it's controversial. So, yeah, paid does not work for an advertising agency network versus brands which directly reaches out to consumers. Owned media, again, I think, it works best when you have definite products to sell. For example, a Vodafone, where you'll go on the website, which is an owned media, and you'll pay your bills, so the traction is much higher. Or Colors, where you consume content directly. A Voot. For again an advertising agency network, the website primarily is an information center, where you go, you understand what exactly which agency is services in what sector, and you understand where who you should reach out to, and then you get in touch with, I think, the corporate communication team here, and we direct you further. The best we can do on the website is put up the best case studies. Yeah. So Denso is a collection of 26 agencies, and each has its own contribution that it makes to the brand, and how we do it and come together, and and we build a case study and put it there. So that leaves me with, and of course in owned we also have, because we specialize in out of home, we have the billboards where we advertise for ourselves, and we say, come advertise on this site if you think it's relevant to you. When it comes to, so basically what works for us are the two pillars, the strongest, which is earned and shared. Earned again is if I call it earned, it's primarily what we deal with here is the press, the newspapers, and when you deal with the press and the newspapers, you're dealing with people. At the end of the day, it's a people's business. So I think what works best for us is to be as genuine as possible and believe in the work that you're pushing forward and putting forward to those people and transfer that conviction. So for instance, that's the key job. You push that content, you believe it. So for example, when Isobar did the Bruises Can Be Good campaign, as women it touched us because every time you see a woman with bruises and wounds, we have already decided that it's because she's been a part of domestic violence or has been groped or raped. But that woman, when she comes into light and takes her position, you realize that, oh, she's a boxer. She got those bruises because she fought back. And it touches you then and there. And when it's touched you, the person who's going to push that content to the press, to the mouthpieces, if you have that conviction, if you have believed in the work that you are pushing, I think it's going to work for you. It just sorts you out because they're going to believe it because you're genuine, honest, real. It's human.
Sure.
And
so just an add-on question here. You're very right. So for a professional service firm like yours, advertising is not usually the way out. But when you're preparing your case studies and creating content, essentially there's a lot of content marketing which B2B or B2B service firms do. And you create so many case studies. But if people are not watching those case studies or not looking at them, and you're not allocating a budget to promote them,
so
that's one.
That's where the shared media part comes in. Where we use our digital properties very strategically. We are very focused with a lot of clarity. And I think there's a very thin line between shared media and earned media again.
Sure.
Because once, again, the same thing, you push it on the social media channels, on your YouTubes, and it gets interactive. So every query, every comment is sat upon and thought upon and responded to. We don't react to it. We respond to it. We understand the feedback. We understand the perspective. And once the viewer and the reader has understood that, okay, they genuinely believe in this work and they genuinely want to get a feedback on it and work further towards it, I think then they become your mouthpieces and they become their brand ambassadors. So these two, I think, as long as you're real, you are there, and you are instant, I think it works. It works for us.
That's demanding too much. Real, there, and instant. All right. So that takes me to instant magic bricks, right? So you've got lots of things happening. You've got a huge platform. Pretty much, you actually own the media as well in many ways, and you've got to sell that media if you have to be profitable, as an organization. So for your kind of a firm, which I'm presuming, and maybe I'm wrong here, advertising is very, very essential to an extent, right? How do you build credibility, in an industry which is called real estate, and where the participants are not known to be credible per se, and you've got millions of them, right? And so how does that work for you?
Magic Bricks has been like an online real estate portal, and it's and our TGs are there where one is driving business and the other is driving traffic. So we have to be very, when we started up the PR vertical like 2 years back, there were two objectives. One is to create compelling stories and stay with the consumer during the entire life cycle of the home buying process. And we must keep in mind that the home buyer comes once or twice during his entire life cycle because we own one house or maximum two houses. So, but transactions in India have always been offline. So how do we create that entire journey so that the consumer stays on our platform during the entire, even after the home buying journey, after the transaction ends? So there were two verticals around it. One, to engage with the consumer with relevant content and to inform him, to empower him, but taking into consideration that it doesn't impact business. So keeping that in mind, in fact, in October, we launched a YouTube channel called the Magic Bricks TV. So there were multiple aspects, and we thought that it should be a platform for all the stakeholders, including our advertisers and also the consumer, the end user, the home buyer. So because I think real estate for the last 2 years has seen a lot of policy implications. It has impacted business, it has impacted credibility. But to be honest, to those who are advertising on our platforms, we should also give them a platform to say what are the challenges that they are facing, so that even the home buyers, they are also aware about what the industry is going through. And to be honest, there are a lot of credible developers as well, because there are some developers who don't even advertise. It's only through the word of mouth they have their own credibility. So to malign the entire industry is not the right thing. But our primary challenge has been to inform and also because Magic Bricks has been owned by the Times of India Group, we want it to be seen as Magic Bricks. The last 2 years, we have developed PR strategies to ensure that, because driving PR for a Times of India Group is challenging, because who will talk about you? So we thought that let's use our own platform to earn media. So we have a lot of rich consumer data, that how the consumer is behaving. And we saw that we started creating stories on our own platform. And gradually we saw that our rival, like the Hindustan Times, they were so interested, they started a locality watch for the Bombay edition. So for us, that was a big breakthrough in creating that Magic Bricks is on its own.
Sure, very interesting. Yeah. So you mentioned about the Magic Bricks TV.
Yeah.
So I see this trend quite extensively. So it's not specific to Magic Bricks, but brands want to become media channels themselves, where you start creating a lot of content which allows you to engage with your consumers, but you also want to advertise the space. So do you see that as a distraction? I mean, is it a product which is created to monetize equity, or what was the intent? Is it to create equity? Because the two sometimes conflict in terms of intent.
So the idea is not to monetize it.
I see.
So the idea is to be with the consumer during the entire process of the home buying process. So we have like different, like if you're searching for a locality, today people want to see videos. It's not that you just go and see the listings on the platform. You want to get into the locality, see what people who have bought their properties in that area, what are their views. You want to know about the developer, how credible your developer is. So we have each and every program for each and every stakeholder of this industry.
Interesting, great. Prateek, over to you. So very different industry from all of us out here, and I think that's where the diversity kicks in. So at NIIT, how does it work? Now, NIIT is a conglomerate of so many companies. Most people don't know all of them. There's a big training business, but there's a tech company as well. And you know, it's extraordinary how this brand has evolved and stayed relevant. So what's been your strategy? How have you played the split? Are you responsible for taking all the decisions when it comes to splitting all these things? I'm still curious to know who owns the pyramid or the tripod or the quadrant, right? So if there is anybody out here,
thanks, Saurabh. Interesting nomenclatures coming over here for quadrant, tripod, pyramid. So maybe I could add one more to it, a sphere. So it's like, it's like a 360, and everybody has some part to play in it.
And I thought I'd quit mathematics and geometry.
So I'll take care of the education arm of NIIT, which is NIIT Limited, and we have software arm as NIIT Technologies. So I'll kind of talk more on NIIT Limited. So the way we structured here is the various life cycles of a learner. So it could be right from the school, then to youth, which will be the employability, and then work pro with the working professionals, and then moving on to the corporate space, which is the enterprises. So we look at the training segment across the various life cycles of the learner. And for us, it's extremely critical that trust as a factor is something that our end audience, looks up to us for. So therefore, how do we look at the mix, the peso mix as it's been coming to be called right now? And how is it so important for us? I would say that the peso has always been there, and it's been there even earlier when there were traditional brands like Tata Steel, and for example, they said we also make steel, and so that was the mainstay of their communication, and everything else happened to happen around it. But I would just step back a bit and see what has changed, and why is it now becoming even more important that we integrate it all together and make it a sphere. So I would say that one of the larger consumers, if I go from a consumption tangent of our audience, they're happening to be a mix of millennials. In fact, even in the enterprise segment, we have a B2B to B2C audience, and many of them are also influenced by millennials trend. And they seem to identify with causes. That's becoming a very important part in communication. So purpose-driven brands, if I were to say, standing for something. And we've seen many examples of late, and one of the famous ones is the Nike one, which says that, stand for something even if it means losing everything. Sonia, your company's done a study which is often quoted, the MTV Youth Study, and which talks about how important it is for millennials to identify with purpose-driven brands. So therefore, it's becoming more important now because the social media has opened up huge possibilities for conversations. So whatever a brand puts out there in the space, whether it be paid, whether it be earned, owned, or shared, it has to be seen in totality because it then gets talked about. So at the end of the day, you are getting to be on their discussion timelines. And to reach there, have you used the quadrant of paid or have you used the quadrant of earned, shared, or owned? That is something that you have to take a call internally. But the end result is not driven by how much you want to do in a particular segment. Sure. So for example, for us, coming back to an IIT, if I were to say in the youth employability segment, important thing is that they need to have a direction to their careers. So can they look at an IIT as an inspiring mentor, for example? So the entire communication there is around inspiring mentor, in which we are looking at telling them what are the best choices that they can make, and we are more as an enabler, identifying their skill sets and what is best for them, and then suggesting what are the courses that they can take with us. In the enterprise marketing field, which I directly also take care of as head of corporate marketing for NIIT, we are looking at the pain points for the enterprise customer, which is the CHROs, the CXOs, and what is it that they need to upskill their workforce. So can we talk to them in their language about digital transformation, equipping your team? Is there something that they can do with tech? And how is it that we can enable it? So there is an entire dialogue that we are having. In fact, we have a special focused offering which we just unveiled recently at the annual NASSCOM meet, which happened a few weeks back, on full stack developers, which is the basic need for the IT industry. So the discussion and the conversation around that was a full stack future. So can we be looked at, identified as a full stack developer is to our company, which is StackRoot, the initiative that we launched for that, as perhaps if I were to take a earlier view of Xerox being to photocopy. So the idea is how do we come to the conversation timelines, and if for that I need to use whatever quadrant, I would like to see it in totality as a sphere. That's the point of view.
Very interesting perspectives, Pratik. Thanks for that. Sudeep, I'll actually now carry the discussion, more like a relay here. And, Pratik spoke about the idea of millennials wanting to take a view where they want to associate with a cause, the purpose. In many ways, it could be very India-centric, but it's also a global trend. And I like to call it a trend because I do see that people are discovering their identities, or they're more confident about it, and suddenly they want to relate with something, own up to something in that sense. How does that impact the way Vodafone Idea thinks? And in a way that, as a brand, you kind of influence a pretty large audience. I mean, you're probably one of those brands who got access to millions and millions of consumers. Well, Vodafone Idea in India, but Vodafone globally as well.
So, yes, we reach out to hundreds of million people in India, as well as if you look at it globally, then it's obviously much, much bigger number. I think, and that's where each of the brands has their own very definitive positioning and have their own very unique proposition. For example, for Vodafone, just about a couple of years back, or a year and a half back, we actually relaunched the brand and said future is exciting. And this was all about associating with the future, aligned with what the millennials are thinking. And then what are we? We are essentially enablers. We are connectivity providers. And using that connectivity, you get empowered to do whatever you would choose to do. You could access Sonia's TV channels. You could access Prateek's courses, and you could, obviously Magic Bricks, you could go and buy a house. Chocolates, I would still visit the retail outlet. I like to taste them first. But yeah, theoretically, you could order a basket of chocolates as well.
Not theoretically, we already have an online store.
I know that. I'm just saying that. You could always do that. You could do it at anywhere. So everybody has, you know, so I'm essentially the driving engine, let me put it that way, for the millennials. Their first port of call is what they see in the morning, which is the phone or the handset or the tablet, whatever they are using it, and the connectivity that comes with it, to which is their gateway to the world. So it's a very crucial element from our perspective that we are making the choice, that we are aligned with what the thinking of the youth of this country is, of the youth of the world is, and more importantly, it is in some way driving towards a larger purpose. I also have brand idea, which, I mean, today people fondly remember of what an idea, Sergi, and that was essentially in one of the ways starting of this whole purpose-driven advertising campaign, which several of my colleagues around the table referred to. So it's very clear for our perspective that we drive that through, and all our ideas, all our campaigns are, you know, kind of linked to that core proposition that we want to do, and that's acts as a very good filter.
Yeah. Yeah, Sudeep, great. I think you mentioned your role as an enabler, and you also spoke earlier about enabling the ecosystem, you know, empowering people to become successful, your consumers. Obviously, you're providing the soft assets behind it. But, you know, deciding a brand's role is not easy. And I'd actually like to save you from answering this and pass it on to Ophira. But what role... What role should you play? Because you could be, if you're the enabler, then you probably don't want to be in the limelight. You know, so enabler is not supposed to be also standing on the stage, should be behind the scenes, right? But then brands want to be in the front, rather at the forefront, if I may say so. And when we talk about, you know, aligning with people's choices, as you said, so should brands look to align with what people want to hear, listen, participate in? Or can they be a little bit more risky in making dominant choices and say that, hey, let me lead the show, let me set a totally new trend, you know, and probably take a little bit of a risk out there. You know, alignment is okay, yeah, we align with you, we enroll with you, and it's a safer bet. So from a food point of view, and of course, food is the space that you operate in, be it chocolates and, you know, the Bonvitas of the world.
All the good things.
All the good things which people desire, yeah. And how do you, what kind of a role does your brand want to take when you're looking to communicate with consumers? Are you the one who wants to play this, you know, that person in the family, it could be a mama or a chacha who gives the chocolate and triggers the desires? Or what kind of a role does Mondelez wants to play out there? Yeah.
So I think given that we are a house of brands, right? Mondelez is a corporate brand. Yeah. So there is one role for us to build the Mondelez corporate brand.
Sure.
So I just want to segregate that a little bit, yeah, because it could be confusing for the viewers. There is a role that all of us play in building a corporate brand, and that's building corporate reputation. Yeah. And on the other hand, we have consumer brands like the Cadburys and the Bonvitas, etc. And the role that we play there, all of us, marketing, communications, everybody, the entire organization, is to build brand love and brand trust.
Sure.
Because we want to sell the product.
Yeah.
Yeah? And we want to build an emotional connection with our consumers,
sure,
so that they keep buying us.
Sure.
That's why we innovate, that's why we come up with interesting campaigns, that's why we do on-ground,
sure,
we do interesting advertising, we do online, etc.
Sure.
So I think there are two clear spaces.
Yes.
Now each brand, whether it's a global brand like Cadbury or an Oreo, etc., has their own role to play in the consumer's life.
Sure.
Yeah, and sometimes that role needs to be provocative, and sometimes that role needs to align with what's happening currently. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's one answer that I can give you for this, because each brand has their own brand playbook, their own rollout. We keep in mind the trends that are happening out there. Sure. But what you are seeing overall is brands are taking the first step very often on social issues. They're coming out there, they're making a statement. Because the consumers today, the young millennials that are out there buying your products, they want to see change. They want to be part of change. They want to be purpose-driven. You know, so this whole piece of being purpose-driven that all of us spoke of. So I think there is a trend, but I think it has to fit in with the brand philosophy and the brand ideology.
Sure.
It's not a matter of just going out there and making a step.
Arushi, sticking to the purpose-driven narrative, you also spoke about a campaign out here, right? Now suddenly everybody is saying the same thing, right? Not just in this group out here, but I think that's why I like to call it a fashion trend or maybe a bit of vanity out there. We want to feel good about the kind of work we do. And somewhere it's in our conscience, there is some element of guilt which must have gotten in, I don't know how many centuries back, but we want to suddenly do the right things. Do you see it as a trend, or do you see it as something that's going to be there for a very, very long time to come?
I would not really want to term it as a trend, because that won't really do justice to all the work that brands have been doing and we as advertising agencies have been doing. It's the current scenario right now is very experience based. So brands right now, they're building their identities one experience at a time. That's what I would want to say it as, because something very personal and very small, as a kid dipping his Oreo and then dunking it and then eating it. So something of that sort was an idea that came to our FCB interface team, and then they brought it forward and it became into an ad, and then people all over the world were following it and doing that. So somewhere with another brand of ours, which is managed by FCB Ulka, which is Horlicks, we brought out something which is called emotional nutrition. So we talk about the nutrition that the powder provides to the children, but there's an emotional nutrition which the mothers bring to the table. So this film was made in Kota, which is the suicide capital of the country. So because a lot of students come here, and I believe you would agree with me on that. So what we did was, while students were under pressure, the exam pressure, we took a bus full of mothers with the food and items that those children love in those Horlicks bottles. And that was not a forced thing. Those people already use Horlicks. You will not believe, down south there is not a single home which doesn't have a Horlicks bottle. So catching up on these things, we made something like emotional nutrition. So it's all about experiences today, and it's definitely not a trend, but it's more meaningful advertising when you're taking nuggets from real life and then presenting it to people, and they would relate to it, and the shareability would, of course, increase.
So Saurabh, if I could just add one line to what she said.
Yes, Prateek.
So it's a very interesting thing that you said, that purpose-driven brands and the communication, are we seeing more of it, much of it, or enough of it, or is there some time that we'll say, okay, this is only so much that we can take? Well, we do have examples of brands celebrating just the brand. Okay, so there's one that just got launched about a couple of days back. So this is that Vivo changeover has happened to Xiaomi, and they've got a brand ambassador, that's Ranveer Singh. So Ranveer is now the brand ambassador for Xiaomi, and the entire 1 minute plus digital ad which is playing on YouTube, it's gathering hits like crazy. And that's just celebrating the brand. It's just a mindless celebration of the brand, and he's just kind of doing it at the moment. You had that in the past also. Alik Padamsi had The Little Girl, so which was the famous iconic ad which launched also many people, like Preeti Zinta was one of the famous ones. Little. So there will be space for those as well. So I'm not saying is it this or that. It'll be probably this and that.
Sure. Interesting perspective. So that brings me to you, Sonia. Look, you own the media, and in a way, people who are looking up to you to, advertise on your platform or push content on your platform, do you ever take the role of a consultant and tell them, hey, please, this is not going to sell. I know you're paying me, but you expect a certain ROI from me, which I don't think I can give because this content will not resonate with our audience. So do you have a very strong check in place? I mean, how do you make some of those decisions? Is there some kind of inadvertent consulting that happens in guiding brands?
There are teams in our organization that look at branded content, and they actually sit down with the clients to say that fair enough, you want to advertise within Balika Vadhu, but we can't be selling something that is against the grain of the show. So if there is a subtler way to kind of put that product out there, then we kind of work with their teams and our teams here to put that message out that is still in the realm of what the show is and the language the show speaks.
Sure.
Yeah. So
that's still contextualizing with your content.
Yes.
But you know, if let's say purpose-driven is the theme out there,
right,
versus meaninglessness or mindlessness. I mean, I think both themes work pretty well. I mean, a brand has a choice, and they can say that this is what we want to stand for. But you feel that there is certain kind of content that does really well, and it's not with the context of what you already have running as a show, but in general, you know, people expect ROI. I mean, we're not even discussing ROI of all these 4 types of mediums. But is there any reference to that? Is there any discussion around it that, you know, I think your content is great and it fits our program, but you know what, it may not be successful because of XYZ reasons. So is there that kind of discussions that ever happen?
Yeah, because these days all discussions are based on data analytics. They are all powered by that. All segmentation is powered by that. Coming to taking calls on certain times where certain advertisements are actually against the grain of what we stand for a particular brand, we've taken those calls. Despite, you know, us losing out on money, we've said that, you know, this is Nick and it's a kids-friendly channel, and we can't be showing up, let's say, a condom ad, for that matter, on that channel. We've let go of that content.
Got it.
Absolutely.
Understood. Great.
Yeah.
So context setting. So coming to you, Anandita, when you're trying to, you know, well, we discussed about this quadrant of the peso quadrant per se, and then there's a thematic quadrant which is currently going on. So you shared the example of mindless, meaningless, just the brand. It's just fun. You know, there is actually no story behind it. It's just popular and fun and exciting, right? So we want to build a story sometimes to make it more credible. What are some of the other themes you think are out there, you know, besides purpose-driven, a lot of meaning to the brand, depth to the brand, and then there's this one side, the other extreme is the mindless, you know, if I were to, are there 2 other things that we could add here before we build up another quadrant before we leave, right?
See, I think at the end of the day, it depends upon the brand, what they want, and the agency which is working with the brand. It's a lot of minds working together. So, and what is the inference that you draw? So, for instance, you know, so Densu Web Chutney made this digital, created this digital campaign for a music school in Delhi. It's a small music school. It wanted to get recognized. It's music, so it reaches out to you invariably for what it is, and it was a children's music school. So what do? So they removed all the black keys from the keyboard, and they gave the children to play a certain song, and they were all well versed with the piano. Yet they could not recognize the music when they were playing it until the black keys were replaced, and then the kids realized that they were playing "We Are the World, We Are the Children" of Michael Jackson, and it came from the child. So it's music, it's relevant to the child, the song is relevant, and it gives you a sense of the world that we live in right now, and we would not want our children to become. So the brand, the music, the children all fell in order.
A lot of emotions in play. Yeah.
Now there is an ad which the same agency made again for the digital platform, which is called Penguin Dads for Flipkart, which had nothing to do with Flipkart. There was no mention of Flipkart. But it just celebrated dads. Like in this world where always a mother is celebrated, it's the mother who sacrifices, but there is a story to the dad. And they are called the Penguin Dads. Yeah. So, but you'll recall that the ad so well, and despite Flipkart not being anywhere in the ad, you know it's a Flipkart ad. And there is no purpose to it. It's just a story. It's just like, you know, let's celebrate
it's just a story.
a dad.
Let's celebrate, you know,
so there is no theme, you know. It works. If the idea is nice, it's kind, it touches you, That's it.
So we shouldn't look for logic. Great, yeah. So, you know, in the paucity of time out here, so Abhishek, very quickly, and we'll do this because it's a round table, so round the table. Abhishek, starting with you, you know, what is one thing that you'd like to take away and, you know, which you could actually start implementing in your organization?
I think we have
learning
been,
from this. Yeah.
We have been talking a lot about the purpose.
Yeah.
The purpose is to find the right connect.
Yeah.
It can be emotional, it can be fun. And for like the business that we are in, like in the house has an emotional connect.
Yeah.
I think everybody, given the scenario that we are in, I think we need to create that emotional connect with our audience to empower them, educate them, and inform them in the current right order. So I think that is the purpose that we need to find as
Thank
brands.
you. Over to you, Prateek. Yeah. One thing, 30 seconds.
Okay. I'll call it the science of branded content.
Right.
So we are moving towards that, and we have come very far from movie product placements where you had a Coca-Cola and you had Ashwarya Rai have half of it, and Ritik have another half, and Coke is right there. From those days, we have traveled to something like a web series called Picture, for example, where it's so the brand is so much integrated in the entire story.
Yeah.
So increasingly, we're going to see more such examples of placements, and what we're going to see going ahead, the entire peso sphere is the science of branded content.
Interesting. Sudeep, over to you. What is one thing that you'd like to take away?
I think I'm going to take two things.
Okay.
Two things away. One, for sure, is that the power of the idea, whatever be it, and that's going to define whether the peso is going to be a quadrant, a tripod, a pyramid, or a sphere.
Yeah.
Because unless and until you have the idea and the content and it's aligned overall, it really wouldn't work. Your consumers out there would reject you because they can see when you're trying to make a stretch.
Yeah, they can't connect with it.
Absolutely. Second point I want to take, and this is more a personal ambition and goal, is that if we are in a digital world and if we can use earned, shared, owned more, there is a lot of saving to be made, which means the opportunity to create relevant content and create it in a manner that it actually gets amplified or goes viral, as we say it, is that much better and higher. Sure. And those are certain things that one definitely I would like to explore.
Great. Ofira, over to you, 30 seconds.
Well, I think from my perspective, given that we have a strong corporate brand and a strong consumer brand, I think just stretching the limits of how we can use this pyramid, triangle, whatever, to expand the corporate brand and how do we bring that connectivity. It's more difficult to do it with the corporate brand because you're not talking to consumers. So I think that's where, the art of storytelling there.
Great. Arushi, over to you.
I would like to say that brands somewhere are a product of their media. So that was very much relevant after what we spoke here. So that's the key message, along with the idea being the core of the communication for brands, for advertising agencies. That's what I'll be taking away from here.
Great. Wonderful. Sonia.
I think we all have to realize that we are all storytellers at the end of the day. If we can tell that story, we understand our audience, then all the four quadrants kind of come together and tell that story effectively. Like he said, it can be organically being put out. You don't maybe need some quadrant at some matter. Yeah?
Sure. Great. Thank you. Anandita?
I think I have two takeaways. One is, I think videos are going to be very, very relevant because people don't read much. They are limited to the headlines. Videos will be relevant and important. Thank you for that, Sudeep. And I think I would love Dentsu Aegis to be an inspiring mentor, as you rightly said, because I would love it to be a household name like a Mondelez chocolate brand or a Vodafone. For that, you need to be inspiring, and you have to mentor the minds and tell them, yes, we exist just like the other brands. Yeah.
Great, wonderful. I mean, I've never, been part of a masterclass with so many experts, and putting all that piece of very, very valuable content, in just about an hour or so. We've got lots of giveaways for the audience in terms of the what you've shared as knowledge, but also a lot of takeaways for all of you. So I'd like to thank each one of you for bringing this together, and sharing your perspectives and the way you've been handling some of the challenges which you face every single day. And thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.